Well, it is 1 o'clock Central Time, and you are taking InfoSec Compliance. That is Overwatch University Security 401. And our instructor today is Stan Herring, Director of Product and Strategy at Highwire Networks. He also oversees and strategizes for Overwatch Managed Security, which is Highwire's cybersecurity platform as a service. Well, good afternoon. My name is Susanna Song, and I will be moderating today's Overwatch University course. I am the Director of Marketing at Highwire Networks. And it looks like we only have a few people in the webinar right now, so maybe we'll just wait a couple more minutes before, Stan, you get started. But take a look at his bio there. He taught Security 301, Fundamentals of Cybersecurity, so you may recall him. He has a wealth of experience, as you can read there. And just a good guy to learn from. He and I both kind of strategized and went to market with Overwatch 2 years ago. And I've learned a lot from him about cybersecurity, about compliance, just about even being in the channel business. As you know, we are 100% channel, work exclusively through the channel. So Stan, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. Can you hear me okay?
I do, you sound great.
Okay, good, thank you. Well, I'm glad to be here. You know, I hope you find this interesting, and I'm anxious to get started talking about it. I talk about it a lot, even when I'm not on a call, and I think people probably get to the point where they, you know, would like for me to talk about something else. But today we're gonna approach this from a direction that you probably haven't seen, compliance focused on before. So
well, it's a big issue right now, right? I mean, yeah, there's so many compliance programs out there, and I think it's dizzying for a lot of MSPs, even for me to just be current and constantly updating myself on the different compliance regulations out there.
Right.
So it is a very important topic.
Right.
If you go to the next slide, really quickly, as we get more people coming in, Stan is one of 3 of our Overwatch instructors. Next week, you'll hear from Phil Burnett, our CISO, and David Barton sorry, not next week, but in 2 weeks, Phil. And then about 4 weeks from today, David Barton will be teaching 403. So we've got 3 well-respected veteran cybersecurity instructors teaching Overwatch University. And as I mentioned, Stan will be teaching today's class on InfoSec compliance. Go ahead, Stan. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Again, I'm excited that we've got quite a few people on the call, and that we're going to talk about this in a very frank way and in a very casual way at the same time. So I know compliance may not be the most exciting part of cybersecurity. Certainly, there's things that are more popular, but there's not an area of cybersecurity that's not affected by compliance. And to really understand compliance, or to understand cybersecurity, you've got to understand compliance. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the tremendous opportunity that not only has been in the past, but is today for managed service providers. And also I'm probably going to detour from this subject a little bit in the presentation, but just stay with me. It all makes sense in the end. Again, I may not get through this presentation completely, and if we don't, I'll make sure that we have a transcript that you can download after the session and pass on to others or review for yourself. It may take us a couple or 3 days to get that up, but we'll make sure you have access to everything that we need. When you set in on any type of presentation around security, it's very traditional to start off with a mass of scary statistics and around cybersecurity, and talk about all the breaches that's part of the, it has even become so common that has become part of the nightly news. So, it usually starts out as doom and gloom in every trade publication, et cetera. We're not going to do that today. So there may be a few statistics toward the end, but we're not going down the statistic route because that doesn't really have anything to do with compliance. I mean, but not a statistic, but you do know that, every business out there is subject or can fall victim to a breach. It doesn't matter what size they are or what type they are. Security incidents are out there, and it's never ending. There's not a single business. It doesn't matter if you're raising pigs or building rockets. Every business out there is subject to some type of a compliance standard. Some of the standards, can have very significant financial impacts on just reaching compliance, or, if there's a failure to comply with the compliance. So today I'm going to focus on compliance from the perspective of an MSP. We want to talk about it from the MSP's point of view. Every customer that you as an MSP have is subject to at least one compliance program. Some have to comply with multiple compliance programs. Most of the time, your clients depend on you guys a lot as their trusted IT provider and their business confidant to either directly or indirectly meet those compliance requirements. So, let's say you're an MSP that's got, say, 30 customers. You may have to deal with 30 or more different types of compliance programs. There's some more popular ones, things like PCI or HIPAA, but there's hundreds of compliance programs out there. And I'll speed up to that slide. We'll back up, but that gives you an idea of how many there are, and this is just a small sampling, and that doesn't even that's just U.S. based, and a lot of U.S. companies have to comply with and some international ones as well. It's important to know and remember that even if your customers are 100% secure, they still have a tremendous amount of work to do to prove their compliance and be able to report it to whatever entity they have to report it to. And you're going to be the go-to place for them to get the information they need to do that. And on top of all that, as an MSP, and if you take credit cards and things like that, you've got to meet your own compliance requirements. Another area that you're involved here is that as an MSP, you're a part of the customer's compliance because you are a third-party provider to them. You become part of their scope, so you have to provide them, documentation, et cetera, so that they can meet their compliance. So let's talk a little bit about compliance and where it all goes. I'm going to start with two very simple things that I'd ask you to hold in mind before we go any deeper into the subject. And the first one is, threat actors don't give a crap about laws, compliance, regulations, National Cybersecurity Month, or anything else. They're on a mission to steal something of value. And they are hopeful that you, the MSP, and your customers have done a poor job focusing on security so they can exploit the business quickly and then move on to the next network. They don't know who the businesses are most of the time they won't know who the businesses are that they're exploiting, or if there's anything valuable there, etc. They just need to, it's a volume business, and they seem to be doing a pretty good job of it. The second thing is that your customers being compliant, and I know you've probably heard this before, but just being compliant does not mean they're secure. And then the vice versa, just because you're secure doesn't mean you're going to meet compliance. So, that's an important thing to hold in mind as we go through this presentation. Compliance programs come from industry organizations, or some of them get pushed down from the government, and at the best they just provide binding guidelines for security. They don't provide the roadmap to get there, or the oversight to keep you there. Compliance with regulations and standards really only provide oversight of these practices that a business uses and it's all about reducing risk. It's every compliance program is not about technology. It's not about cybersecurity. It's about reducing risk. A lot of people meet, or they say they're meeting compliance just by checking boxes around compliance. They just say they do things which they don't do, or they do things in the least at the least common denominator to meet a certain requirement. They just don't do the due diligence that's needed, and that can, you have to encourage your customers not to do that, because it leaves not only the customer, it can sometimes leave you as the MSP open to a lot of liability. So, doing compliance and doing it correctly is probably a lifelong mission, but it's an important thing for an MSP to understand. And on the first episode in this series of trainings, you may have heard me discuss that security is not about technology. Security, even compliance requirements are about reducing risk. This is all about risk. And this includes the risk that, to a business's privacy. It could be risk to their reputation, or just them being able to stay in business, or, be available when the customer needs them, because they're not trying to put out a breach fire or something like that. To get to a point where, compliance is running as a well-tuned machine, it's necessary to involve three different areas. And one is the administrative side of the whole thing, and then there's a physical side of the whole thing, and then comes the technical controls that we, as people in the service industry, technology services industry, tend to get involved in. So there's three different pillars of that we have, that kind of really define compliance. And the first one is governance, which is I wrote this down, the effective ethical management of a company by its executives and managers. So governance is, how is the business being run, and is it being run in a way that reduces risk? And risk is about effectively and cost efficiently mitigating the risks that could possibly hinder an organization's ability to operate or remain competitive. So governance, risk, and then the last one is compliance. So how a company conforms to those requirements, regulatory requirements that are put forth by the compliance program for their operations and data retention and other business practices, is really at the end of, or the result of, good governance and risk management. That leads to another series of three things that I want you to remember. And before I do, I just want to remind you again that at the end of the day, compliance is about managing risk. But all compliances involve three different types of controls. You've got administrative controls, which is the governance component. Then you've got the physical, and then you've got the technical controls. And when you get down into the risk management, we define that as the likelihood of something happening or something bad happening, and that impact that would be incurred if that bad thing happens. So that's what we look at when we're talking about managing risk. And at the core of it, compliance itself is about implementing all those things necessary to manage those cybersecurity efforts. And at the core of that is people, because people are a part of that security fabric. And you achieve these two things of managing risk and meeting compliance by addressing the physical controls, which used to make. So think about physical controls as things like door locks and alarm systems and camera surveillance. If you think about it, it wouldn't matter how good your antivirus product is if somebody steals your server. So, the physical aspect of compliance is usually front and center, and it's an important part that MSPs can certainly address with their customers. And then, of course, there's the technical controls, which I talked about earlier, that are what most people would think of when they think of security. That's all the things like firewalls and endpoints and security operation centers, the log management, authentication, etc. And it probably covers a lot of other things that you guys sell the customer as a service or product. The one thing that the MSPs are not involved in is, and they can never mitigate the customer's responsibility for those administrative controls over compliance. If you go to the dictionary and look up the definition of compliance, it's laid out as the act of conforming, acquiescing, or yielding, which is, I think, appropriate to what you find. Or it can also mean conformity with or in accordance with orders. So compliance program comes down the pipe, and then you have to conform to that, yield to it, and act in accordance with it. So if you were to ask 10 different people today to define information security, you probably get 10 different answers. So compliance helps customers make strategic decisions about something that we can't actually, or most of our customers can't actually define. So we basically have to start with your customers. You have to start with a definition of what it is and how you can help them accomplish it. If let me get to here. To reach compliance and to do the job that you need to do as a service provider, you've again got to focus on managing risks. And again, that's just about eliminating the likelihood of something bad happening. You also have to make sure that your customer is following those administrative controls, and that those physical controls are addressed even as you need access to things. And then of course the technical controls, that's what most people think of when they think security. And of course you have to make sure that you're doing the right thing, and the customer's letting you do the right thing when it comes to those areas. And there's several approaches to what we label as compliance. It's not just something that's mandated by the government. It could be something that's mandated by an industry organization, et cetera. So basically it breaks down to, we have standards, which standard is is defined as, like the criteria set for a certain task. And a compliance program that is based on standards would be like PCI compliance, payment card industry compliance, where they set a standard, and in order to continue to take credit cards, a business has to do the tasks necessary and prove that to be able to continue. And then, beyond, the standards, you've got recommendations, and the recommendations are just, a statement of practice, like, here's how you can stay secure. And if you do these things, you're going to be secure. And a lot of industries will just take those guidelines to, to measure a company's liability. An example of, a recommendation rather than, say, a mandate or a standard is NIST. NIST is the National Institute of Science and Technology. And, they have a framework of how to be secure. It's very exhaustive. It's adopted by all government agencies and most state agencies, et cetera. And, it's definitely an organization that everybody in the country involved in security pays attention to, because they do a really good and thorough job of that. Beyond the standards and recommendations, you've also got guidelines. That's just what the best practices are. And there's different organizations that like CIS, you may be familiar with CIS, which provides guidelines of how to do the things that other compliance programs need you to do. And then you've got regulations to add to the list. Regulations are directives, that make recommendations or provide guidelines as a result of a legal requirement. That may sound a little complicated, but the easiest way to understand it is the example of HIPAA for healthcare. It's not it's not defined as a compliance program, but if you want to avoid liability when you get breached, and from both the government and from your patients, you have to maintain these certain things. It's pushed down from the federal government. It's saying you have to be doing these things to keep people safe, your patients' data or patient information safe, or there's not a fine for it, but you're going to be really liable if something happens. And then the last thing is benchmarks. And I'll go back to CIS with that. CIS comes up with the hardening processes to build when you build a server, and other things, so that you can provide as much protection in the process as possible. Some entities, some industry organizations require certain benchmarks. Others are regulation. Some are just guidelines. Some are just recommendations, et cetera. Something else that is MSP focused here is the fact that as an MSP, you're in scope for your customers' compliance and risk, the management of risk. So, you're involved in their compliance from the perspective of a third party. Every compliance program focuses on third party risk, because if you get hacked, they have access into your customer, and so you're considered a third party risk, just like some company has a VPN, and one of the employees quits and he gets into the network and creates a problem. Think about the MSP's role. As an MSP, you got full access into the customer's network, and if you get breached, then your customers are subject to a breach as well. And while outsourcing security and IT is a great choice for them, it also can introduce a lot of other issues. like vulnerabilities and compliance headaches if you, the MSP, are not properly equipped to manage data and process it in a highly compliant manner. So, there has to be some oversight by the customer of your processes as well. You guys are handling every piece of hardware that they have. You're involved in the data that flows across that network, and an organization that wants to outsource their IT has to do some due diligence around the security practices of their MSP so that they can meet their own security, as well as just not get some kind of unexpected risk or breach. But the MSP is definitely part of your customers' compliance basis. So compliance itself is just a huge opportunity for MSPs. Compliance as a service has become that kind of like the new buzzword, and it's important to recognize that as a service provider, you're already in the compliance as a service business in kind of an obscure way, but it is a big opportunity, and we're seeing from our perspective as a channel provider of services to MSPs that there's more and more MSPs are targeting regulated businesses, because the more compliance they have to deal with, usually the more spend on IT. And as more businesses are regulated, they're having to step up services and compliance and security, and it becomes imperative for them to use MSPs, and there's a bigger budget with those MSPs in order for them to reach their goals. There was I will get into a little bit of statistics here, but back, I think it was PricewaterhouseCoopers did a survey. I think it was over 1,000 IT professionals, and 74% of them named data security as their top IT priority for 2020. And then what came in second there was automation, and it came in at like 54%. Well, the thing about these statistics that they point to a changing MSP marketplace out there, in which all these companies, businesses, or organizations are looking to obtain advanced security and multi-layered security services from a familiar provider, rather than try to introduce more siloed services from multiple vendors, like a pure play security assessor or vulnerability assessment thing, because it becomes too complex to manage all the different vendors and eliminate infighting between all those different vendors, et cetera. Compliance as a service, it's a perfect fit for your customers, especially industries and such like healthcare, banking, retail, industrial, manufacturing type stuff, et cetera. Anybody that's required to comply with regulations governing how they use IT, is a good target for you. They need the help. A lot of companies are literally struggling, and I'll get into that more in a minute, but they're struggling really hard to be able to provide the IT resources that they need, because a lot of times the way they're approaching compliance can eat up as much as 40% of their IT budget. So it's when you think through all that, it's really interesting to see how compliance as a service not only is a big opportunity for managed service providers, but it also is a market that is booming, and it's certainly something that MSPs can take a part in. you know, and from a number of different ways, from, you know, like things like, even if, you know, even if you're not providing that service yourself, you know, aligning yourself with partners so that, your customer is only dealing with you, and it certainly makes you sticky to that customer, et cetera. But things like, you know, SOC services, or, monitoring defense, monitoring detection and response services, vulnerability assessments, pen testing, security management, patch management, things, some of the things you're already doing, like business continuity, disaster recovery. And then a new area for a lot of MSPs is around physical security. Uh, you know, that's the type of things that, these your customers are having to have to meet their compliance. You're the logical choice for them. Some MSPs are going as far as to offer risk assessments and monitoring and reporting of compliance, and they're doing audits and certifications in certain areas, and of course consulting. This is not just a large opportunity for you as an MSP. It matters a lot to your customers. Your customers, and their businesses are focused on, they want to provide the best and most competitive products and services to their customers. Like a healthcare provider, for an example, they're primarily concerned with providing, excellent patient care, which results in the best possible outcomes. And then something like a merchant would focus on, building loyalty with their customer experience. So, compliance, although it's undeniably important, will never get the attention that it needs, as these businesses need to focus on the things that we just mentioned. And they often, that's why we often see compliance become a nuisance to the business. What this mindset about that can, that's what's leaving them vulnerable to cyber attacks and breaches, and the result of those things, which if they, is getting breached, and then the cost and the damage to their brands, and not being able to meet, being out of business for a few, the days that it takes to get back to working and all that stuff. They take a significant hit. So I just want to say again, it's a big opportunity for MSPs, and as you provide these, solutions that you need to for this, and the services, it may be to a specific industry that you focus on, you'll broaden your own understanding and expertise around all regulatory requirements. Even though there's, hundreds of different regulatory compliance programs out there, most of the rules and regulations, most of the things that have to happen in those are the same. They're just worded differently, or they have a different emphasis, or whatever. So as you focus on security and, compliance as a service, as your expertise grows in any of those, you'll be able to take that into others as well. I say use this expertise to expand your business, and if you're able, pursue some certifications that are out there around compliance. Become a certified PCI assessor, or getting into providing things like PCI validated vulnerability assessments, etc. Anything that you can do that helps the customer meet compliance and validate that compliance in their particular niche in our industry. So, if you look further into compliance, you're also going to find that if you specialize in a niche that's governed by regulations, they typically have a requirement for very, very, very detailed record keeping and auditing of that. So, even though that piece of it doesn't sound like it's an IT function, and usually doesn't fall in the IT environment, it does create even another opportunity for MSPs. Many of the newer compliance management platforms offer automated processes that allow you to track the compliance for the customer as a service, and that helps them stay on track, provides accuracy. It's a recurring revenue for you. It's a web portal and that you and the customer would share, etc. And it again helps. It makes for a stickiness between you and the client as you help them compile all that data. And it solidifies too, this is an important point, is that it solidifies your role with that customer as a trusted business advisor and their go-to person when it comes to anything to do with that would affect risk in their business. On a different note here, I just want to say this too. MSPs have kind of skipped some of the compliance requirements or in industry oversight, but just here recently, the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, which NIST falls under, has been developing a set of standards for MSPs to limit the security and compliance risks that's involved with them, and to help them not only be more secure themselves, but be able to not become a problem to their customers' compliance. So as your customers learn about NIST standards for MSPs, they're going to start asking you questions about that and wanting to know if you're compliant with that. And if you are, they're going to trust you more, and that's going to translate into even more companies outsourcing their compliance to MSPs. I hope that makes sense to you. It's a like I say, a tremendous opportunity for MSPs right now. And it's the right time in the right place. It's the right time for the people who are in the right place to take advantage of that. I'm going to kind of wind this up. We probably only got about 10 more minutes, but I want to go through some some takeaways around compliance that I'd like for you to pay special attention to. I've been doing this, dealing with compliance for over 20 years, and these are some things that are not directly related to compliance in a lot of cases, but things that I've learned in dealing with businesses around compliance, that in order to do it and do it right and have a relationship with those customers that's strong, you have to do some of these things. And the first one of those is never forget that your customer or that business is in business to make money. Now, and of course, that would seem obvious, but if security gets in the way of them making money, then security becomes an enemy instead of an ally. So keep that in mind. And the information security has got to align with that business's objectives, and the service provider has to take an active role in that and help make sure that that's not seen as a liability rather than an asset to have proper cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is a problem, but it's not a technology problem. The business problem that everyone has to address is risk. It's a risk problem. So keep that in mind when you're doing anything with a customer or for yourself. It's all about reducing risk. That's the goal of every compliance program out there, is to reduce the risk and liability that stems from that risk for the entity that it applies to. So also for me, I have found that it really helps to make security fun, which really comes down to attitude. I mean, if you think about it, who wants, I don't, and I don't think you do, you don't want to go out and do something that's boring or painful. And if it's important to our success, then we should be making it as enjoyable as possible. And that's just an attitude thing with your customers about how you communicate with them about security, and making sure that they don't again don't see that as a business liability rather than something that benefits them. I mean, obviously you can't make it something they want to go do on Saturday night instead of instead of something else on Saturday night, but you do need to be conscious of the fact that they have a bad attitude sometimes around security because of the amount of money that they have to spend, and addressing that in a jovial way can go a long ways toward building trust. So another big piece here is not only knowing this yourself, but communicating to your customers that people are the single biggest risk in security. Most businesses overspend on technology, and they neglect the risk that that their employees and their partners or vendors are. So that's an important thing to be able to know before you're when you're talking to a customer, that some of them get defensive about that, but people are one of the first places to address and, how those employees are surfing the web, what they're doing, are they educated about risk, etc. I think the fifth thing in this list is that the idea that compliance and security are the same. Compliant and secure are not the same thing, and it's important that we don't confuse the two. You can be compliant and not be secure, and you can be secure and yet not be compliant. So it's again important how you use or how you communicate that with customers. I think the next one is you're wasting your time if you're looking for common sense in the world of cybersecurity. And I think if it was there, we wouldn't have all these breaches. So, it's not there. Don't look for it. And the word secure is it's a relative term. It's about, remember, well, like we said, security is about managing risk. It's not about eliminating risk. You're never going to reduce risk to zero, and that's why you have as a service provider, you have to have continuous measurements and comparisons of what's going on your customers' networks. Security doesn't mean the same thing to everybody, but it's our role in the industry to provide enough information that kind of normalizes that, so that the right messages get through. And a security savvy MSP typically becomes most businesses' best friend, because it become a benefit to that company, and they don't become a cost center, as we talked about a while ago. I think in this list of 10.9 is that that security is not a one size fits all thing. Every business is different, and every business has to constantly adapt to security. And as service providers, we have to adapt to security and adapt to all the different things that happen, not only in the world, but in the compliance requirements and our approach and how that all takes place. And then last but least, and I say this a lot, and I truly mean it, and there's tons of products out there with a lot of claims, but don't look for an easy button in cybersecurity. I mean, really, just quit looking for it. It doesn't exist. It's about doing the due diligence, and so that's absolutely 100% necessary. Um, the there's I'm going to go through this really quick because I don't want to. We've only got about 8 more minutes, I think. But you know, one thing that you can do as an MSP to raise your status in that world of compliance with your customer and start positioning yourself as a a security expert, as in addition to a a networking expert, etc. There's 5 policy templates that I encourage every MSP to have on hand that they can provide to the customer as a branded either as a document or electronic electric or whatever document. And the first one is a policy template around incident response. I mean, incidents are inevitable, security incidents, and in the wake of a disaster like a breach, people can't think clearly. And as an MSP, you can help them and you can help yourself by making sure that they have a written plan so everyone understands what their responsibilities are. That may include you as the MSP, what the communication strategy is when there's a major cyber incident, what the processes that you're going to follow to contain that incident, and what all kind of things are going to have to be done to recover from that incident. This is a absolutely foundational security process and policy, and if anybody's going down the path of becoming a trusted advisor in cybersecurity, it should be the first step in starting off an overall organizational incident response strategy is filling out one of these templates. The next one would be having a written information security plan. That's like if the customer experiences a data breach, what they do with that, and I mean around reporting it, and when they have to report it, and the steps in that are like notify the law enforcement, notify their insurance company, notify all your vendors and other third parties that might be affected by the breach, your suppliers, etc. And it needs to happen in that order. So providing that to the customer and having that, a lot of these documents you want the customer to have on hand, but as their trusted advisor and their service provider, you're going to want to have these on hand too, to be able to help them execute on this, if something happens. Asset management and an asset management policy is a huge piece of, kind of an after the fact thing that you need to rely on, after the breach happens. As a service provider, you need a go-to list that has all the details about all the assets that customer has. A lot of this can be done through, different software programs, et cetera. But you have to understand, what was on those devices, what are the license keys, et cetera, all these different things, that, affect how you go about, getting that customer back up and running in the shortest amount of time possible. Another good thing about that is that if a breach does happen, you become the go-to person that can actually execute on that the fastest, and you're going to get that call rather than somebody else. Another thing that's not on this list that I just want to bring up to you guys is that in a breach situation, a lot of insurance companies, they have to be called, and then they want to make the determination whether you can do it, use your own providers or have to use somebody that they're sanctioned for. Having a good plan that you can execute on for them and help them, even if they have to bring in a third party, certainly helps cement your relationship with that customer. And then an acceptable use policy is way more important than it sounds. This policy defines what's acceptable for the system, the networks, or any resources. And it's important that all employees, contractors, third parties, everybody needs to have a really clear understanding of what and how those resources can be used. And it's important, not so much from the fact that they had to sign something. It's a liability issue, and it's going to come up when the insurance adjuster gets there and starts asking questions. And if it was related to something that an employee clicked on the wrong thing, etc. The fact that you have that policy and can point to that can reduce, or they can reduce a lot of their liability. So, we can make these policies available to you if you don't already have them. I suggest that you brand them, and also suggest that you make sure that they get filled out. They are important, and after a security incident, you're going to be, you and they are going to be dealing with a lot of different things like insurance adjusters and law enforcement and other legal elements, et cetera, et cetera. So, it's a very, very important part of the whole strategy around being a managed service provider, and also as you move more toward compliance as a service. And I think that's all we have time for. I wish I could talk for another 30 minutes, but I hope you got something out of this today, and I hope you will consider strengthening your position as an MSP by looking into how compliance can be a large opportunity for you. And if you need information about how to other things that you can do to get there, we'll be glad to talk to you. All your existing vendors, et cetera, and go to them as well. But it's a very, very big opportunity for you guys. And I just want to say thank you. I know at some points I ramble and I stutter a lot, but I have enjoyed talking, and I love to talk about this stuff. So if you have questions, feel free to reach out to us. Susanna, I think we've only got about 8 minutes left. I'm going to turn it all back over to you now.
All right. Thank you, Stan. Thank you for, just all the details that you've provided around compliance. I think you've made it very clear that MSPs and, service providers who understand the importance of compliance and stay on top of it have the upper hand, and their customers will tremendously benefit from their knowledge. So as Stan mentioned, we have links to the templates that we strongly encourage you to have your customers fill out. I think you will find a lot of benefit from that. I will have those links available. I'm going to actually create a landing page with all the links and make sure that's included in the email, the post-webinar email that goes out tomorrow. We do have a couple questions. I know we're running out of time, but just wanted to get a couple questions in before we end today's session. Stan, one person asked, if compliance is not security, what is the difference between compliance as a service versus SOC as a service?
So compliance as a service deals with the the mandates that that a company has to do to reduce all that risk. In order to be able to act on that, you need a lot of tools to do that. It's not something that your customer can do on their own. So they have to have like service providers like yourself, and the service providers have to have vendors underneath them that have the right tools to make sure that that happens. So, SOC as a service is a tool that the MSP uses to help his customer satisfy the needs of a compliance program. I hope that is the answer that you're looking for. So,
Yes, so you're saying that compliance would fall under the SOC as a service
Well,
umbrella.
a large percentage of it can be, I won't say a large percentage, a significant amount of it can be satisfied through, a security service provider that's offering more than, say, just a point solution. You got to have something that's more overarching that can address a lot of different areas at one time. You can actually fall out of compliance by having too many point solutions. So,
That's interesting.
yeah, yeah. So, yeah.
And if you're wondering, for those of you who actually are looking at your screen, Stan wanted to just make it fun for people who are listening to take a look at this diagram. You guys are all probably very familiar with this, but it's just an added bonus during this Q&A time to remind you and refresh your knowledge. One last question: when is NIST coming out with when is NIST coming out with compliance standards for MSP?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question, and it's a rather elusive answer because, like anything that has to do with the federal government or a federal institution, they they run on a different time. Their watch doesn't work the way my watch works. It's they have to do things. They have to draft this stuff. They use industry people to get that information, and they put all this into a draft, and then they put that out there into the industry for people like us to peruse and make suggestions about or call them out on certain things. A lot of times they'll find vendors trying to sneak in information that would be beneficial to them, and they want to keep it all neutral. So they usually go through a long list, a long series of releases. You'll have release 1, release 2, and release 3, sometimes up to release 5. As they continue to edit that down, you can probably go out and get the first release off of the NIST.gov website. You'll have to search for it. I don't know exactly what it's called. All of them are named with numbers like 800.53, 800.171, etc. So, but you'll just have to look. You can probably just Google it as well. But you can start, if you can get a copy of it, you can start looking at and trying to get in line with it. It won't change much as all these other iterations of it come about before it becomes a finalized document. It's probably it can be downloaded today, and then you'll just need to keep up with all the changes that go forward, and that may take before it's. Well, I don't know if this is the right word, but before it's ratified, you may have to. It may be 2 years. So, but the expectation around what the MSP is going to do and how they're going to do it is applicable today. It's not a certification, and it's not a compliance program. It's a recommendation, but I can assure you a lot of large companies are using that know about this, or going out there and using this as a way to differentiate themselves in the market and as a way to make them look and show that they have professionalism. So highly recommend that you read it. It's probably not, gone with the wind, but it will be beneficial to you.
Yeah, and again, like these large enterprises and corporations have the people, study this. That's what they get paid for. But for MSPs, maybe smaller MSPs, it may be beneficial just to partner with someone with the knowledge and the
That's exactly right, and somebody that's involved in the whole compliance and that can guide. I know we do. We end up spending a lot of time, advising and guiding our MSPs that partner with us on a lot of different aspects of it, and it's really, it just gets down to a lot of really best practices and industry experience. And so you call them, put pressure on your vendors to rise to the occasion there.
Well, it's 2:00, so we're going to wrap it up now, but just a quick reminder, you will get an email from me tomorrow. If you haven't yet signed up for the partner portal, please do so. That way you can get a CPE credit for today's course. And then last but not least, if you haven't registered for 402, that's all about security operations and analysis. So our team leader, Phil Burnett, the Chief Information Security Officer, will be teaching that course in 2 weeks. Thank you very much. Have a great day, guys. Take care.
Thank you.